live on air and online. Trending with Andrew Curtis.
No mai, hi to mai, welcome. Good afternoon. It is Trending. I'm Andrew Curtis, and this is the most innovative news show in New Zealand. Massive thank you to everybody who helps make this happen every week, because of course we are going to take a look at the news stories over the last week. But if this is your first time with us, bear in mind that the content you're about to hear has been dictated by you, or the people you live next to, the people you live above, the people you live below, general in your proximity, because of course it's dictated by your search behavior and the places that people have gone clicking on your major news services. So what stories did capture people's attention? What did they go looking for? What did they go clicking on? Can we learn something from that? Or if nothing else, maybe just be a little bit more up with the pulse, shall we say, of what the kids are curious about. Makes you more interesting at work, perhaps. Now, today's going to be an interesting one. I got to say, as a broadcaster, part of you hates this and part of you love. Actually, that's not true. I just love it entirely. Josh, not well today, which I don't love, but it does mean I'm kind of flying solo today, and with a lot of different elements going on with the show, going to be very exciting to see how it all goes. So might have to just make a few more deliberate attempts to, check our chats and, texts and things that come through today. But remember, that is a huge part of what the show's about. So, of course, you can always text through, as I mentioned, 8168 with the first word, Rima, if there is a story that stands out to you today. Maybe you got some thoughts on some of the issues we'll be raising. Or, of course, you can join the chats. Now, this is the more modern way to do it. If you go to rima.co.nz, there's some links to our social media channels. So you can either click through to YouTube or to Facebook, and, well, you can join the show that way. Add a comment in the chat. Let us know your thoughts. Say hello. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on everything. Juggle some plates. It looks like we're up and live, and there we are. Look at that. I can see ourselves at least on the Facebook, so that's one box ticked. But where shall we land today? What are the most popular news stories in the country, or at least from around the world too, in the week that was? We're going to jump all the way to number 2 for our first story.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
That's right, number 2 trending in Google. What have people been searching for? Interesting to see it pop up this week, because we covered this over the last few weeks and we're surprised that it wasn't getting a little bit more attention. But I suppose maybe people were just waiting for the finale, the grand reveal of the new Pope saga. New Pope. New Pope was the number 2 ranked search term in the country over the last week. People curious to know, who is this guy? What's going on? And, people from the USA, of course, absolutely ecstatic that one of their own had now become pontiff. And people now wondering too, what is that going to mean for the future of the Catholic Church? How is this new Pope going to put his spin on things? We know already that he's looking to, in some senses, still promote a, what would you call it? Safe pair of hands? A nod to the past in selecting his papal name, and that is going to be Pope Leo the 14th. Now, I've got to say off the top, Pope Leo does sound a little more conversational, don't you think? Good old Pope Leo. There's Leo over there. Pope Leo. G'day, Leo. How are you? See, it's a very Kiwi way of relating to a Pope, I suppose, too, isn't it? But before we get too far down our own train of thought today, why don't we see what CBC News had to say by way of introduction and helping us meet our brand new Pope, Pope Leo the 14th.
Che ha dato la vita per il gregge di Dio.
Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost will now be known as Pope Leo XIV. Coming from humble beginnings in Chicago, the 69-year-old is the new leader of the Roman Catholic Church. He's the first American to fill the role.
He's not a showboat. He is very calm, but extremely intelligent and extremely compassionate.
Father Mark Francis, a former seminary classmate, says Prevost has always been committed to outreach.
He's a person who's very sensitive and is concerned to allow everyone to have a voice.
His papal name may signal his priorities. The last pope to take that name, Leo XIII, was known for focusing on Catholic social teachings, especially having to do with workers' rights. Prevost spent much of his life outside of the United States, serving for about 2 decades in Peru, including as a missionary and bishop.
Part of it was a very poor part of Trujillo. He always made conscious decision to make sure that the poor were attended to.
His record is not without controversy. Accountability groups have accused him of mishandling clergy sexual abuse claims in both Peru and Chicago.
Di tutto il mondo.
From Peru, Prevost was called to Rome, appointed by Pope Francis to hold one of the most influential Vatican posts, overseeing the selection of new bishops. He was made a cardinal in 2023. Prevost is believed to have shared many of Pope Francis's views on the environment and on the need to embrace migrants and the poor. Though he will have to clarify his views on the role of women within the church.
And one of the most important issues was the experience of women who don't feel valued and who want to contribute more to the life and to the ministries of the church.
As Pope Leo addressed the crowd, he spoke of the need to build bridges.
I saw him as someone who would build consensus, someone who was able to see that the via media, the middle, is where dialogue really is fruitful and takes place.
Tonight, many will be hoping the new pope can be a force of stability in a world growing increasingly turbulent. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
So that is our new pope, appointed to, well, continue facing the challenges that are affecting us all. And he was appointed, of course, by the previous pope. In fact, apparently about 80%. 80% of the current cardinals were appointed by Pope Francis. And in that respect, I suppose we're not surprised that he would continue this legacy of social issues. And I mean, you might have heard in that story there too, that the previous Pope Leo as well, very concerned with workers' rights. But it's an incredible tension to try and have to manage, isn't it? That there are the social concerns and I guess the more conservative family tenets within the Catholic Church. And then, of course, how do we engage with a world that sometimes does not share those same values? But again, Pope Leo the 14th, it got me thinking though today on a somewhat adjacent note to all of this. And it's a shame Josh isn't here to add his experience on this front too, because it did get me thinking about changing a name and the significance thereof. I mean, of course, Pope Leo had something of a precedent to choose from. But if you had to change your name, this is what I'm curious to know from you today. Is there a story behind the changing of your name? And if it is, why don't you share it with me today? So I'm going to try and juggle around the different platforms we've got going at once. So whether or not it's on the YouTube chat or perhaps on the old Facebook Live, or maybe you just want to text through 8168 with the first word Rima. Have you changed your name? And what was the story behind it? Was it a significant one? I mean, of course, I'm sure for many, maybe your surname changed when you got married. That's a pretty well-established convention in this part of the world. At the risk of stirring, far be it from me, of course, to wade into those sorts of murky waters. There is nothing in the Bible about having to change your name when you get married. How's that? Is that a good start? It is very much a social convention you find here around other parts of the world. It's not as commonly done. I know in Asia, for example, Chinese culture, it's just not a thing that you do. You're still a team. It's still the two of you partnered together for life, we should hope, in most cases, right? But the changing of your last name, very much more of a perhaps Western tradition. But I mean, it's fine. I don't object to it. My wife decided that she wanted to take my last name when we got married, but I kind of left that one up to her. If I'm being exceptionally modern about these sorts of things. But that was kind of her call to make. I know Josh, when he got married, he and his wife hyphenated their last names together. So bringing the two. The one that always sticks in my mind, and I do actually remember what it was specifically, but I don't know if it's really fair to read up people's names, unprompted. I am aware of a couple who, when they got married, they created a new last name by hyphenating their grandmother's last names. Now, how's that? How's that for, well, I'm not entirely sure. But look, it's up to you, I suppose, if you want to do that. The thing that'll catch you by surprise, of course, as a guy, however, is that, you don't get the free pass on the new last name, do you? Oh, no. In fact, even my wife still had to pay for hers because although she changed her last name, she legally changed her first name as well. There's a whole story behind all of that. There's a name that she'd gone by in New Zealand for a very long time. Those of you who know my wife's name, Aki, not actually her legal name either. So even though she could have legally changed the last name for free, she had to then pay to change the first name as well. And every now and then it pops up. as a bit of an annoyance because you've got to have one of those certificates on you just to prove you are who you say you are. But maybe you do have a story of changing your name. I'd love to hear from it. So whether or not you want to text through 8168 with the first word Rima, or head to the chats, go to rima.co.nz, click through to either the Facebook or YouTube live and let us know. I say us. It's really just me this morning, isn't it? Afternoon. Goodness me, where am I? If you have had to change your name, what is the story behind it? Let's see what else has been trending this week.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Doing this whole kind of cross-handed piano thing, which you'll see if you're on the stream right now, because I've got the one mouse over to my right-hand side, which controls the computer that I'm working from, and then one over on my left, which looks after like the live stream and all this kind of stuff. So it's very tactile, shall we say. But, you know, these are the things we sign up for when we become broadcasters. Let's see what else we've got in the country. And now this I would expect to see maybe higher up the list as the days march on. But first emerged only a day or so ago, Pay Equity New Zealand. Now this has been fascinating to see develop. And for those of you who followed the show for a while, you'll know that I love talking about a Rorschach test. In other words, like an inkblot test. The idea, of course, being that an inkblot test does not look at anything objectively. It is a subjective pattern that then, of course, the person who is doing a Rorschach test describes back to maybe their analyst, and it gives you some sort of an insight into their personality. Do you see a butterfly? Do you see, the moon in the sky? Do you see, somebody spilling their dinner on the floor, and that's maybe what the smudge looks like? Well, in this particular case, we're talking about a social and political issue intertwined, which of course is how you know we're going to have a constructive and good faith conversation. He says, dripping with sarcasm. Pay Equity New Zealand. Pay Equity New Zealand. Goodness me, what a discussion there has been over this in the last little while. Some, of course, advocating the view that, well, the current national-led government is absolutely selling women down the river, breaking with however many decades of progress in attempting to get equal pay for equal work in this country. However, the National Party making an argument that says the way that this legislation had expanded was becoming unworkable. The comparison of pay for people across different fields was becoming, well, far too abstract. Who's right? Who's wrong? In many cases, I think it'll determine very much, your view will very much be determined by who you voted for or who you would never vote for. But before we share more about our own thoughts on this particular front, let's see what stuff.co.nz had to say about National and Labour accusing each other about lying over pay equity changes.
It's been a week since the government's pay equity bombshell, and the shockwaves still haven't subsided.
They've been lying to New Zealanders all along.
Labour's resorting to lies and misinformation, frankly.
Both sides accusing the other of lying over whether women's pay is being cut.
Taking money away that women were otherwise going to get is a cut.
We're not cutting women's pay.
They are cutting women's pay. They are taking billions of dollars that women were going to receive and they're cutting it. That's cutting women's pay.
We are not cutting equal pay. We are not cutting women's pay.
The debate now one of semantics.
But the pay rises won't be as big as they would have been otherwise.
Well, we are yet to see, because we now have a new law in place. Employers and employees are now able to submit claims that have merit and to have them assessed to see whether there has been gender discrimination, and then to use the guidance of the law to reach settlements.
So
the size of those settlements can't be known.
And in the House, nearly every opposition question was about pay equity.
Would the Prime Minister take up the offer of any of the many hard-working women that he has cut off from pay equity claims to spend a day in their shoes, changing nappies, delivering babies, or educating young children? Or does he plan to ignore them as he's ignored good lawmaking practice?
I'll just say to that member, we are not cutting off pay equity claims.
Why is she continuing to gaslight the estimated 150,000 women who are saving her budget?
There is no magic pot of money available to wipe every tear from every eye. Actually, a country must always live within its means.
Nicola Willis applying that sentiment to something else today, essentially saying we're nearly broke.
New Zealand is now approaching its debt ceiling, which is to say But if a significant event were to happen, be it an earthquake, a significant climatic event, an outbreak of disease, then New Zealand, having to borrow more, would be in a position where it could become very challenging to pay that money back, and we could enter an interest rate and debt spiral.
While our country is beautiful, it tends to have the odd earthquake or flood that we need to put money into collectively to recover from.
How close are we to that ceiling?
Well, there's no official ceiling.
A cynic might say the government was attempting to divert the conversation away from pay equity.
Of course Nicola Willis is scaremongering.
Aside from pay equity though, and being a natural disaster away from going broke, Willis was continuing her pre-budget money sprinkle.
I'm announcing today that the government is committing an extra $100 million to the Elevate Venture Capital Fund at Budget 2025, unleashing a new generation of start-up businesses in New Zealand.
The Elevate Fund was launched by Labor in 2020 and has invested in companies like Dawn Aerospace and Halter. Willis says investing in Kiwi startups is vital given the volatile global climate.
The international order is undoubtedly undergoing profound change. We are seeing a shift from rules to power, from economics to security, and from efficiency to resiliency.
And resiliency is something the government will need, with the pay equity debate showing no signs of abating.
Well, you know what I love about these topics? They're so easy to have a good faith discussion about, and we can really get to the heart of it without being distracted by absolutely pointless political squabbling. I actually need to be careful, man. I'm falling far too easily into the cynicism today. Goodness me, how hard is it to have a conversation about this topic? Oy, when these things kind of pop up, it is almost impossible, and this is one of my frustrations. I think I'm prepared to say for middle New Zealand, and that is the 80% of us who fall between the political extremes on either front that want to call either the hard left or the hard right, or call everybody hard left and hard right. They've got their caricatures about what people are like and what their motivations are. No interest in really adjusting those at all. But for the rest of us, don't you really wish it was easy to find out what was going on here? Now, I say all that to let you know that there are some attempts to provide some illustrations on this. You'll find them all on our major news services. I would encourage you to try and cover as many of them as you can. Those that maybe sit a little more left-leaning, which is, I suppose, the majority of our major broadcasters, whether or not it is your stuff.co.nz's. People have mixed feelings about the Herald, whether it's left or right-leaning. That might be a discussion we need to have another day. You've also got places like the NBR or even, say, News Talk ZB, and they've got their own news service as well. What is really going on? So if I can provide some measure of summary, what's the difference here between pay equality and pay equity? Well, equity, of course, to do with fairness, the idea being that there were certain female-dominated fields. So in other words, fields where women made up the majority of staff. For example, health and education are traditionally the most common examples that are cited, where those who are working in those fields were not paid equivalently to men who may be working similar roles. The challenge started to unravel where you had the opportunity to compare one field to another and say, well, because men in this field earn X, women should earn the same. What is a relevant comparison? And you can get into all sorts of finer details here. They had things like, whether or not administration staff and civil engineers within the same company, although it's the same industry, should be paid on similar amounts and all these sorts of things. A lot of the controversy too around this new law being that it's kind of hit the reset button on a few of the outstanding claims regarding, pay equity. So many of those in those industries will now have to begin again. One of the big changes being that previously an industry needed to have a majority 60% female workforce as one of the criteria to make a claim, make an appeal on this particular front. That's now been raised to 70%. Now, that is a reduction in the number of people who are going to be eligible to apply for a settlement under these particular arrangements. But as you've heard from Nicola Willis and, David Seymour, somewhat unfortunately, we're getting close to the cap. What is the cap? Well, it doesn't really exist. Doesn't do a lot for your case when you put it like that. Admittedly, he was clipped off at the end, so there's every chance he went on to explain a little bit more about what that's about. Is this fair? Is this relevant? What is your take on this? Have you even tried to get your head around this discussion. One development, which I need to provide a bit of a content warning for, because it is, 12:25 in the afternoon. And so there was an article that was posted on the Spinoff reflecting on Andrea Vance. Now, Andrea Vance, a journalist who wrote I guess you call it an opinion piece, speaking of these particular changes, and labeled Nicola Willis the C word. If you're not aware of what the C word is, this is not the time and place for me to inform you. But Nicola herself then later responded to say, well, I didn't expect to see myself described as the C word in a nationally syndicated piece of journalism. Is it even journalism at this point? Other people were, of course, asking. This has prompted all sorts of introspection about what is the appropriate way to speak of women. I think, nailing my colours to the flag, at least in some respect, it does highlight a fair amount of hypocrisy around the way that we treat the way women are spoken of in public. Of course, there was a lot of debate when Jacinda Ardern was Prime Minister and some of the language that was used to describe her, some people objecting even to her being referred to as Cindy as a derogatory term, now defending the fact that, of course, it's only fair that we should call Nicola Willis the C word. Nicola herself bristled, of course, at the use of that word, and probably understandably so. Of course, herself, not completely innocent, she was caught out, describing Labour's Jan Tinetti she had a, some would think rightly point out, a derogatory sexist term as well. Goodness me, what does this all mean? What do we make of all this nonsense? And it is nonsense. This is, I think, the thing that is the most frustrating and annoying about issues that are actually of great significance, at least personally. I don't know if you have the same experience, but it gets so bogged down. It's so impossible. It feels so impossible to penetrate the haze of absolute hyperbolic nonsense that comes out with something like this. Is it true that you actually hate everybody? No, you do not. Well, prove you don't hate everyone. I mean, goodness me, really? Do we find any value in this? Who is question time even for in Parliament? Does anyone ever learn anything worthwhile from those sessions? I would argue that maybe less than 5%, and that's probably being charitable even at 5%, ever follow these kind of discussions. I'm at a loss. Do you have thoughts on this one? Pay equity in New Zealand. What was your impression on all the coverage that had been generated here? Probably the easiest thing for you to do today, just because I'm a little technologically limited. Let's see if I can keep track of messages in such another field as I go. What do you think about this coverage of pay equity in the country? You can text through 8168 with the first word REMA. Tell you what, why don't we give this a try? We'll do this. We'll try and figure this out live, right? Because, we're an adventurous bunch around here. Let's see if I can jump into the chat for our YouTube stream. See what pops up there. No, we're drawing a blank on that front right now. Okay, what about our YouTube? I think we might have something coming through on the Facebook, sorry. So we'll see if we can revisit that. But in the meantime, pay equity in New Zealand. What's your take? 8168 with the first word REMA. Let's see what else we've got for you today.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
And if you've just joined me, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. It's a little different because my offsider, Josh Beatty, my able-bodied and able-minded producer, not able to kind of steer the ship in the background. So, do we have hands everywhere in the studio today? We're like a, puppet master, controlling many a mouse and scrolling up and down many a screen. But nevertheless, we are still looking at the news stories that were the most popular either in New Zealand or around the world. That is our criteria for the stories we discuss on this show. Where do we get to? Well, let's go to something completely different. Why don't we head to Singapore? And very brief coverage here, but I thought it's interesting to see what rates are mentioned on the Straits Times. Are you aware of the Straits Times? Anyone want to yell at their radio or at their computer and tell me what country the Straits Times is from? 3, 2, 1. Did you say Singapore? Because if you did, you'd be 100% correct. This has been a really interesting publication to follow because of its proximity to China and other Chinese news that starts to emerge. Singapore, one of the few, I guess you would call broadly Western countries that has a net favorable rating of China as well. It has a largely Chinese population. I believe it's something around 80-odd%. And at least those of, say, Malay Chinese heritage, now I suppose would call themselves Chinese Singaporean. Hard to say. But no matter where in the world you are, let's all agree that McDonald's is a great unifying force for good. Is that true? Well, if you head to Singapore, at least from May 13th onwards, you get to visit the first ever McSpicy Museum. Now, this was the number 6 trending news story on the Straits Times. The McSpicy Museum. So fans of the McSpicy burgers can now turn up to this museum, which opened from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. until the 25th of May. And it features interactive zones that take visitors through the history of the local cult favorite, which was introduced in Singapore in 1999. So in other words, this is like the Singaporean Kiwi burger. I would give it a crack. I think it's one thing we're missing out on New Zealand. We should have some more of these international inspired fast food offerings. You see it with like KFC and stuff as well. KFC overseas. Do you know you can get an entire chicken in KFC China? Like a whole chicken. You can just get the whole chicken. I'd want to give it a go. Wouldn't you? Busy family, Friday night, get a whole chicken from KFC. Sounds amazing. There's also 50 McSpicy burgers to be given away. Surely that's worth the price of admission. That's worth flying to Singapore to go and grab. And obviously it's popular enough because it is the 6th most popular news story from the Straits Times in Singapore over the last week.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Now, this next story, absolutely fascinating. And we love to travel around the world too, as we have just done with Singapore, to now go to the UK and the Guardian website, which provides a great rundown of the most popular news stories from their site, or the most read, at least, over the last week. And one thing I find fascinating about the Guardian is how globally minded it is. The number of times their number one story is like an international thing, as opposed to, for example, you head to the USA, you head to, say, CNN, for example, more often than not, it's a US story that is the number one. On The Guardian, in terms of the most read, I mean, again, fascinating. Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines, has just won a Philippine mayoralty from jail in The Hague. Ain't that a headline? Rodrigo Duterte wins Philippines mayoral election from a jail cell in The Hague. Incredible. So he's a very polarizing figure. For those of you who have good memories of the former president, he gained notoriety for his particularly hardline approach to drug users, drug dealers, and many people were killed, in fact, in their hardline crackdown against, drug users and drug takers. So he was arrested and flown to The Hague, where they're saying thousands of people were killed, many of them young men in depraved, I was going to say depraved, maybe a little bit of both, urban areas who were shot dead in the streets. So his arrest stirred all sorts of defiance and sympathy. And now, even though he's 80 years old, tens of thousands gathered in Davao, lighting candles and singing, while supporters held rallies on his favor. In his favor, they said he's the best president we've had. Now, what I find fascinating with this is the rise of popularity of the strongman leader, shall we say. Haven't really seen it in New Zealand, haven't seen it in Australia. People would argue we're starting to see a bit of that with people like Donald Trump in the US, but it has been suggested that these kind of leaders are often a great indicator of the wider instability in the world around us. And I'm a big fan, coming back to Singapore, we just spoke about what had been happening there on the Straits Times, and when they're not looking at the McSpicy, they have, of course, mostly favourable attitudes towards Lee Kuan Yew, their founding statesman, who also was Prime Minister/President for about 50-odd years. Now, this is a guy who, in more recent times, I suppose, was seen to be much more democratic in his approach to the world. But if you read up on the history of Singapore, you'll see that he made some very tough calls at the founding of the nation when things were kind of unstable, things that would make you feel rather uncomfortable in a Western democracy. So the question that starts to get raised now is, well, is that kind of required? These freedoms that we experience in the West, are they kind of a luxury built on the back of perhaps a more stringent society when things are more in flux? It seems to be that people gravitate towards these kind of strongman leaders when times are a little bit more uncertain. Will we see that in New Zealand? Hard to imagine who of our current batch of leaders, though, would fit that mold. I think we'd be a little ways away from having that sort of change, perhaps, at the head of our governments. But, I mean, this is an incredible story. And, again, bearing in mind that even while in The Hague, Duterte managed to run for office, and win an election. How do you conduct the mayoralty from the prison in The Hague? Does that make you just even more of a martyr to your people? Is there some deeper significance to all this? Would love to know your thoughts on this one as well. Maybe if you're Filipino in particular. I know we do have a lot of support in the Filipino community too. Maybe send me through a text today. 8168 with the first word, Rima. Let me know, what's your response to news like this? Overall, favourable, unfavourable attitude towards this gentleman? Maybe you see him as a bit of a mixed blessing, a barometer of what else has been going on in the Philippines. Fill us in today and help us understand why this gentleman and a story about his successful mayoralty was the number one news story, not even in the Philippines news, but over in the UK on The Guardian. Incredible stuff.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
What else do we have to look at here? Let's head back to New Zealand now and go to stuff.co.nz, our bastion of human interest stories in New Zealand, or at least that's what it seems to be. Over the last little while, we've discovered that fans of Stuff really love to click on a story that provides a bit of a human element to our day-to-day living, even at the expense of what you might call more substantial or quote-unquote newsworthy stories. And so what's the number one? Well, the number one on stuff.co.nz is all about Stewart Island and what it means to be the sole police officer in that community. Let's see what they had to say. Without a holding cell, this remote island's only cop has to stay up all night with offenders. Here's the coverage from a story that was number one at stuff.co.nz.
Oh, I can't believe I get paid to live and work here, especially when you look at what's out and around here. The ability to hop in the water and go for a quick spearfish, get a power or two if you want them. Yeah, working sole charge, it provides the challenges that I think a lot of us as police quite enjoy. For me, it's all about the interaction with the general community, having come from working in Invercargill, being a city that you've afforded a wee bit of anonymity. Coming here, you get to work with people perhaps a wee bit more intimately, as it were, because you get to know them through the day-to-day aspect, so that when something does happen, they call upon you or you call upon them to help support doing the role, which makes it quite special. And I think it's a thing that really appeals to me as part of the role, and just being interactive. In a small community, and this will be anywhere around the country, you wear multiple hats. So I know myself here, I've been involved with the local school, even though my kids are adults, that being able to work with them just with a wee bit of sport coaching and supporting their activities.
How cool is that? So that was your number one story. Imagine being the sole policeman on Stewart Island. I mean, on the one hand, it'd be great to live in a community where you know one cop would be enough to do the job, right? Would you take a job like that? Living on a remote island? I know sometimes when the stresses and strain of life get a bit much, you look at those dock postings, right? If you want to be positioned in the Marlborough Sounds or something like that for 6 months, they throw you out on Great Barrier Island or somewhere that doesn't have cell phone coverage, and you think, bliss. But what a great story. And again, that was your number one. Number one on stuff.co.nz. His phone's always on. And if someone needs to be detained overnight, he doesn't get a wink of sleep. Well, that's because Senior Constable Stuart Newton is the sole police officer there. And there's also no holding cell. So where do they put them? They stay overnight at the police station, apparently, sometimes with handcuffs on and sometimes sleeping on the floor. Not much more to say about that. Other than that was your number one story on stuff.co.nz. Let's continue to see what else captured the attention of New Zealanders over the last week.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Got a great comment through from Felicity before too, where we were talking about pay equity in New Zealand, and she raises a really interesting point that I think cuts both ways. I don't care what political stripes you might have. But Felicity's saying for the past 18 months, the government has been saying there's no money, but they keep finding millions for the projects that no one wants. Interesting. I mean, I don't know. You could argue no one wants. Maybe they're just more aligned with their political stripes. But isn't that government? There's always money for the stuff you want to do, isn't there? And so it does breed a certain type of cynicism. I will say too, I think one of the most well-founded criticisms of this government has been that although they have talked a lot about tightening the belt, if you look at their overall expenditure, especially even in their last budget, you will not find a significant drop. I mean, this was the thing they campaigned on, right? New Zealand, we're overspending. The last Labour government, they went insane. They paid for everything, blah, 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 blah. We're going to come and tighten our belts. And yet, if you look at total Crown expenditure in the last budget, did it go down? Now, you can make your argument that, well, they're better stewards and they're getting blah, 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 blah. Again, Rorschach test, right? If you're going to make an argument that the previous government is spending too much, you cannot spend more and then claim, yes, but we're doing it better than they were. No. Naughty behavior. It's almost similar to what's been happening in the US and why there's some objectives behind the Department of Government Efficiency. You know, the whole Elon Musk thing, saying how, oh, yes, we're finding millions of dollars of, misspent money, billions even. I'll happily admit they probably have found billions. But then you also find things like the Pentagon being given an extra like $100 trillion or something for other weapons programs and so on and so forth, even though the Pentagon itself also fails financial audits all the time. I don't think they've actually passed one for, I want to say, a decade. Might be wrong on that front. Could be even longer than that. So, again, Rorschach tests up to your eyeballs the whole way around. But thank you, Felicity, for your thoughts on that. Maybe you got some thoughts on the whole pay equity saga going on with our government and, whether or not it is, in fact, an egregious abuse of power. Is it trying to rewrite the books? Were things done in a unsustainable manner with previous governments? Will this national-led coalition right things, or will you maybe maintain a healthy degree of skepticism about both of them? Because let's be honest, politics is the art of gaslighting and telling people what they want to hear.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Is that cynic? Is that a bit of cynicism? Yeah, it is. It is a little bit. Nevertheless, always room for you as we dive into the next story now. Where do we get to? Yes. Charming chap, this one. Jevon McSkimming. Jevon, actually, I think it is Jevon is how you say his name. McSkimming, the Deputy Police Commissioner. Now, he was number 19 in our trending news stories over the last week. Man behaving badly. Let's see what One News had to say about the departure of the Deputy Police Commissioner. And it turns out, of course, if he hadn't departed of his own free will, he was about to be fired regardless.
We begin tonight with the Deputy Police Commissioner quitting with immediate effect. The Minister of Police today saying Jevon McSkimming's resignation came before he would have been sacked. McSkimming was already on suspension pending a criminal investigation, and now there are new allegations which Mark Mitchell says are of a very serious nature. Political editor Mikey Sherman reports.
Jevon McSkimming is a big name in the police, a key player alongside former Police Commissioner Andrew Costa. McSkimming helped lead the response to the anti-mandate protest at Parliament. He's also been instrumental in the war on gangs.
We've been doing a lot of validation about who's on the gang list.
But today, McSkimming's legacy ends under a cloud.
There's a series of investigations that are ongoing that are looking at a range of issues, and let's let that run course.
A process had been underway for the Prime Minister to remove McSkimming as Deputy Commissioner of Police, but McSkimming got in first, quitting effective immediately.
Should you have removed him before he was able to quit?
I'm not actually going to go into that given the ongoing police investigation that is in place.
Did you simply move too slowly on this?
Again, I'm just not going to go into the details of it.
McSkimming had been on suspension since late last year, facing a criminal investigation. But Police Minister Mark Mitchell recently received new allegations of a very serious nature. In a statement today, Mitchell said when Mr McSkimming was invited to respond to the allegations, he chose to resign, confirming my view that his continuation in the role was untenable.
Mark has put out a pretty good press release that we can say as much as we can say at this point in time.
Jevon McSkimming could well have become the country's top cop, losing out on the role of Police Commissioner to Richard Chambers last year. Chambers today confirmed the criminal investigation into Jevon McSkimming will continue and is not affected by the resignation. McSkimming was appointed Statutory Deputy Commissioner in 2023 on the recommendation of then Prime Minister Chris Hipkins.
Police Commissioner and the Public Service Commissioner both recommended his appointment. There were no red flags at all through that process.
So don't the public have a right to know what those allegations
care about skincare, Carolyn? I sure do.
And I think that's appropriate.
An employment matter turning the spotlight on police.
Mikey, just how serious are these allegations?
Pretty serious. That's how serious they are. Sorry for the, advertisement interjection and all that, but when you're running multiple things at the same time, that's what you get. So, What a scumbag. I mean, I know. There's an investigation underway, but does not seem like the most pleasant fellow in the world and does nothing, of course, to help build the trust in police, which, has vacillated wildly in the last little while. To my knowledge, there were early concerns about an inappropriate relationship that McSkimming had been involved in, and now the direct quote from Mitchell, this is Police Minister Mark Mitchell, says the allegations of a very serious nature recently came to light, separate to the investigation that led him to being suspended. We understand that may have something to do with, euphemism coming in, adult content of a certain nature. I don't think I'm saying too much to share that with you today. So these investigations continue. It's just... What do you say to that? What do you say? I mean, this guy could have been our top cop, right? And as you heard from the leader of the opposition there too, when he was originally appointed to his current role, there were no red flags to be seen. I suppose, in some ways, it's heartening to know that, these things do eventually come to light and the appropriate steps are then taken, but it doesn't make you feel great about things, does it? So, of course, McSkimming, removed from his role, now facing criminal charges. That story, though, was only number 19 in the country in the last week. So, should it have been ranked perhaps a little bit higher, considering the nature of the offending? And or is it just that the police themselves aren't that newsworthy for most Kiwis?
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Let's see what else we've got, shall we? We've got about 13 minutes or so together today. And thanks if you just joined us. This is Trending. We're taking a look at the news stories that were most popular in the country over the last week. And as we close in on our top two news stories, shall we head to CNN? Where the number one story, you know how I mentioned earlier in the show on The Guardian, their number one story is often international? Well, on CNN, not so much. No, for CNN, of course, how Trump managed to get his much-needed China trade victory. Now, anyone, of course, who's been following the news over the last little while, or at the very least looking at their KiwiSaver, has felt the impact of this tariff-based economic warfare. Trump trying to maybe redress the books, redress the balance, and seems to just really object to the USA being in trade deficit with anybody. It seems to be that that's really what he was trying to rebalance. Many times he spoke about the fact that the USA was getting ripped off and that the tariffs that were in place mirrored the tariffs from other nations in the world. So these were tariffs that the US was being charged, and so they're like, well, you charge us, we're going to charge you. But on deeper inspection, it turned out that no, in fact, these tariffs were simply trying to redress the fact that if, say, there was a 60% trade deficit between what the US bought from one country, like Vietnam, for example, versus what Vietnam bought from them, 60% was then the size of the tariff. Well, he's got his victory. Or does he? Let's have a look at this short clip from the CNN to talk about Trump's unprecedented trade deal.
President Trump may have just pulled off the impossible. De-escalation between the U.S. and China, a relationship that had gone to the absolute brink, potentially taking the entire global economy with it just a few days ago.
It's unprecedented. There's never been anything like it. It's a very exciting time.
So what actually happened here? Maybe there was a plan, or at least there ended up becoming a plan by Trump administration officials who decided to start with the most maximalist approach on tariffs. China reciprocated. Now they're talking. Things were pretty dark for a period of time. Now they have their negotiations. They have their talks. They actually still have very high tariffs in place, but they also have the potential for an outcome that Trump views as a necessity in rebalancing trade between the two economies, and one that Chinese officials now at least seem willing to talk about. This is an inflection point, not just for the U.S.-China relationship, really for the entire global economy. Dozens of trade talks now underway. The Trump administration very clearly wanted to reach this space where they think things are going to be put on the table that perhaps wouldn't have been otherwise. That was the whole point of a process that undoubtedly didn't seem like it was planned or strategic, but now puts them in the place that they can make deals with the UK, potentially make deals with China, up and down the line. How those turn out, well, that's going to dictate whether this strategy actually works or whether it turns out catastrophic in the end. President Trump.
Fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating to see that kind of coverage on CNN as well, which I guess you'd call broadly positive about our man Donald. Actually fascinating to look at some of the comments on this, because this moment I saw this, I thought it's a rather favorable interpretation of what was going on. And CNN, traditionally, not very pro-Trump. So, yeah, as you can imagine, the comments on this one, pulled off the impossible. You're kidding, right? He started a trade war. He should not get any credit for chickening out. Are you kidding, CNN? An acronym that I probably need to be careful about reading out. He started a trade war, so he could be the hero who fixed it. What even is this video? And so on and so forth. Not so much positive response to this clip. It's had 55,000 views and only 600 likes. You can imagine the number of dislikes may well be quite high. So what's really going on with this? I will add my 2 cents, and then you're welcome to share yours as well. Do you think this has always been a master plan? Or is it kind of coming up with things on the fly at the risk of maybe leading the witness? I think it's a little bit of both. I think that shock and awe tactics are very much a Donald Trump speciality. He seems very comfortable dropping a verbal bomb on something and then seeing what it stirs up and then dealing with the consequences later on. One of my favorite examples recently was with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine, and he talked about him being a dictator. And then a little while later, he was in another press conference and somebody reminded him that he said that. And he goes, "Oh, did I say that? Ooh." And you could tell he was, I don't know. It looked in the moment. He was a little bit surprised at himself and the way that he'd handled that particular moment. But it does seem, in the Ukraine case, to have prompted a willingness for another round of talks. Zelensky himself has said he's going to beat Putin in Turkey if indeed Putin also decides to turn up. I don't think he will. But coming back to trade, though, if indeed the goal was to rebalance trade, then this has certainly sparked a whole bunch of conversations about it. Whether or not this particular approach was all a master plan, if I am going to interpret this a little bit more favorably towards President Trump and his administration, in an entrepreneurial context, and I know this might sound really, I don't know, well, I'll just say it and you can decide how it sounds from your perspective. There is something to be said for just do something and then respond as it happens. One of the things that holds people back in business a lot is the need to plan, but they never do anything. Like in other fields as well, I've known people who want to start writing and recording music or want to start a podcast and like, oh, but what should the name of the album be? What should I call my podcast? And they don't start for like 2 years because they haven't got the name right. Well, sometimes you just have to do something and then respond and see what happens. If Trump was genuinely unhappy, as it seems like he was, with the state of world trade, and he kind of wanted to create some fertile ground for renegotiation, shall we say, then this was a good way to do it. I don't know if he expected, though, the level of economic turmoil that followed. He described it in early days, of course, as being like a post-surgical response. You know, the hard part's been done and the patient is recovering, I think was one thing that he said about this whole trade war, blah, blah, blah. So is it all a masterstroke? Is it just one man responding to his own hubris? Somewhere in the middle? What do you reckon? What's your take on this? Would love to hear your thoughts. 8168 with the first word Rima. You can text me through today, or I am trying to keep an eye on the chats as well, on the messages as they come through. Let's have a look at our Facebook Live. All right, what's going on our YouTube right now? Okay, there we go. Gosh, I've got a lot of copies of my own face staring back at me right now. It's a bit unsettling. What do you reckon about this? Do you have a net positive view of what Trump's trying to do with the global economy? Does it make sense to you? Does it seem like a master plan? Does it seem like it's completely improvised? Maybe somewhere in the middle? Let me know your thoughts today. As I said, text through 8168, make the first word Rima, or you can head along to the Rima website if you like, and then you will see there's a link to either our Facebook or YouTube pages. You can click through on those and add a comment in the chat, where of course you can also be watching along this afternoon.
Trending with Andrew Curtis.
Woo! Boy, I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking today. Is the voice sounding a bit tired? I think it probably is a little bit. It's funny, you know, when you do this, it's not just your typical radio show. It's also a live streamed experience. And trying to find the right balance with this kind of stuff. It's quite interesting, but that's what the show's all about, right? So you can watch along and be a part of the show that way. Or, of course, just be listening. And hopefully it's been as interesting and engaging for you doing that as it has been for those who have been watching along as well. Last story, though. the most popular news story in New Zealand, if you have a look on Google at least, and what the most popular news searches were, number one was Mother's Day. Mother's Day. Thankfully not when is Mother's Day, because that's, well, a bit dangerous, especially if it happens on the day. But no, Mother's Day was your number one, the most popular news story in the country. So for something a little bit different, I thought I'd show you something that turned up on Psychology Today. This is one of the most widely read publications on psychology from around the world, and they put up an article of what moms really want for Mother's Day. So if you're a mom or a mum or a mummy or whatever it might be, see how you resonate with this one, because they've started off by saying that they don't just want a day off, they need a day to themselves. And all the mums said amen to that. Or did they? What do you reckon? What do you really want for Mother's Day? If I may be so bold, one thing that I think maybe mums struggle with most is being able to advocate for what they want, because your whole life is kind of what other people want, or it can very easily become that. Gentlemen, if I may be so bold to speak to you on this one, sometimes I think one of the things we most need to do is to be able to have that conversation without maybe getting defensive, which can be hard to do, but to ask our wives, who are also mums, what do they really want? What do they really want this year? Because again, I think maybe it's, you can call it nature, you call it nurture, or a little bit of both. Women perhaps more accustomed to putting the needs of others ahead of themselves when it comes to the things that happen around the house. A lot of the times, of course, guys will put the need of the family ahead of themselves by the work that they're doing. A lot of the times, gentlemen don't love the work that they're doing, but because it's important, because the family needs them, because they need to be working hard, they will do that. But then come home and maybe feel like their sacrifices don't necessarily overlap. Is that a charitable way to interpret that? Because again, I feel like the most effective way to view the sex is to be charitable to both. Anyone who sets you up to either be angry at men or angry at women is conning you. All right? That's my little word of advice for those who are watching along today. So here's a few thoughts then on what moms really want, according to Psychology Today. When polled about what they most want for Mother's Day, women give a lot of different answers, but aside from taking a nap, gosh, the love language of naps, right? Two things rise to the top of the list: quality time with family and time alone. So the gender leisure gap is something that gets brought up quite a lot. Put simply, women get less free time than men, and for mums it's even worse. But why is that so? Well, one reason is, according to this article, the unequal division of domestic labour. Mothers, both those who work outside the home and those who don't, spend twice as much time on household tasks and childcare as fathers do. Now, here's the interesting thing that I've also seen reported on this front. You know that dads are much more engaged in domestic labour than they used to be, historically at least. If you look at time allocations for domestic labour for dads, compared to say 30, 40 years ago compared to today, men are much more involved in things around the house than they used to be. But the same studies also report that women are also more involved again than they used to. Get your head around that one. So, women are living time and a half. I feel like one of the challenges, blokes, I'm gonna say this one to you, and at the risk of nailing my colours to the mast on this front, one of our challenges is to help the women in our lives make time for themselves and absolve them perhaps of the guilt that can often come with that, because I hear it a lot. Gosh, I'm so busy, I'm getting pulled from pillar to post. Oh, take some time for yourself. Oh, I can't do that. Yikes. Can't win, right? So is there something maybe that we can do for the wives, for the mums in our lives? Because again, I'm not going to be so bold as to say I know exactly what the experience is like for women, but I can say it seems to be something that's harder for women to do than it is for men. Men may be a little bit more capable of just switching off. And again, you can argue it as a nature or nurture thing. For the point of this conversation, it doesn't really matter. The outcome is the same. And if you feel like you're living time and a half, then you will certainly need a break, because nobody can sustain that. And so with all that said, big thank you to Felicity, who got back in touch too. I asked a question about Donald Trump and his economic genius. She said, I think it's more likely that Trump was throwing a tantrum that wreaked such havoc it forced others to respond. If it was a plan, couldn't he have tried something that didn't almost bring down the world's economy? Well, it's a great question, and we may never know. Trying to understand the mind and the dealings of Donald Trump is something that is outside of my expertise. But look, Felicity, I appreciate your thoughts in our chat today. Thank you to those who've been watching along. This is actually interesting too. A text that's come through. Really appreciated the coverage this afternoon. I wasn't aware the current government spent no less. Yeah, have a look at it. Considering a lot of pullback from funding main service sectors, namely education and health. And if the money is still being spent, these services and women should not be missing out. Have a look yourself too. Let me know what you discover, but it's absolutely true. A lot of the criticism of our current government, although they've talked big about Labour overspending, if you look at the total government expenditure, it hasn't dropped. With that thought, thank you again for tuning in and being a part of this show today. Always appreciate your thoughts, your comments, and so hopefully we'll have ourselves a Josh Beatty again next week where we dive back into the news stories that Kiwis have been searching for more information about. And on a personal note too, thanks for bearing with me as I run a solo show for today too. Wouldn't be the same without you. But we'll catch you next week between 12 and 1 for Trending. I'm Andrew Curtis. God bless. You're amazing. And gosh, you look good today.